you very much, distinguished panelists, Admiral Chauhan, ladies and gentlemen. To me personally, the Bay of Bengal has deep resonances. I will touch upon the security issue and the Great Nicobar Project and its importance later in what I'm going to say. But for now, let me just say this. Historically, today there is a conversation about the revival of Bengal. But in that conversation, we have forgotten what it is Bengal is being revived from. This implies that it must have been something good in the past which it wants to go back to. How did that good thing that Bengal was in the past, in fact the entire eastern belt of India was in the past, Ongo, Bongo, Kolingo from our ancient civilizational text, how did this entire region, especially Bengal, become that good thing, that place of wealth at the heart of trade and commerce? We have to remember that Bengal's strength as one of the cornerstones of trade and commerce in our part of the world came because of trade from the Bay of Bengal. You cannot talk about, as a Bengali, as people thinking about great economic and trade figures from our history, people like Dwarkanath Tagore or Mati Seal or a range of these people. You cannot think about all of them. You cannot think about the wealth of the house of Jagat Seth without thinking about the trade that happened in the Bay of Bengal. That wealth, that commerce is irretrievably intertwined with these waters. If there was no Bay of Bengal, there would not be this wealth. This is absolutely critical to understand. When we talk about the Renaissance of Bengal and the industrialization at that time of Bengal, Dwarkanath Tagore's great dream of bringing British industrialization, so to speak, on the banks of the Hooghly, what was he basing it on? He was basing it on his family's history of deep trade in these waters. And yet, even today in India and including in Bengal, this conversation happens as if the Bay does not exist. As if this trade happened in isolation. And that is a grave, great mistake. And this has happened because of long years of absolute disrepair, where we have forgotten places like Murshidabad, we have forgotten places like Chandanagar, we have forgotten our own history. And this history, this is an opportunity in India to rebuild on this history once again. But again, I want to put to you, this history cannot be rebuilt unless we put this Bay front and central at the heart of our imagination for a new Ongo, Bongo, Kolingo. I will expand on these comments later, but for now, this is my core point. The Bay is central to our imagination of reviving India's eastern frontiers.
So, Hindol, let me move you along the lines that you already spoke about. First of all, I still want to ask you, given that the Bay of Bengal is older than Bengal as a political or even a cultural entity, what once again does this sea area mean historically to the people who have lived on its shores? Was it only a trading entrepot collection? Were there intrinsic activity, social, cultural, economic, that are endemic to the peoples of that particular this particular maritime space? And also equally complicated is that history records how colonial rule, first the Portuguese, then the Dutch, then ultimately the British, transformed the Bay into an instrument of imperial extraction. And then, of course, came partition. And you yourself, in an earlier discussion with me, I know, have described that period as one that severed connections that had organically developed over centuries. And so how does that rupture then cast a shadow over the present-day Bay of Bengal and its cooperation? What is this Bay of Bengal finally about? Is it about the security of India alone? Is it about the cultural renaissance of the region as a whole, of a sub-region as a whole, because now the sub-region is subsumed into a larger region called the Indo-Pacific? And even when we talk about the Indian Ocean, I'm always trying hard to convince people, when you say the Indian Ocean, please say it's the western segment of the Indo-Pacific. When you talk about the Pacific Ocean, please say it's the eastern segment of the Indo-Pacific. If we don't believe in the Indo-Pacific at all, let's drop it. But if we do believe in it, then let's put our money where our mouth is, or at least our words where our mouth is. So, Hindol, would you be able to tell us something about your perspectives on these issues? Thank you.
Thank you. I would be delighted to. I think of the question you've just asked me, Admiral, as the two C's that define this region: cosmopolitanism and contestation. You cannot think about one without the other. Let me take a point that parochial Bengalis are usually very proud of, that we are very cosmopolitan. We embrace, you go to Calcutta, they will tell you, well, we have Armenian restaurants even today, and we have Baghdadi this and this, that and the other. All of this international influence, if I were to call it that, came via this route. Not just trade and commerce, but also culture. I'll give you one example. Recently, I was in Kolkata. I went to eat at one of the most sort of celebrated restaurants in Calcutta. Young chef, new restaurant, being feted in Condé Nast and so on and so forth. He told me he had begun using cheese from Chandanagar. Where did cheese come to Chandanagar? Who brought cheese to Chandanagar? How did it even develop there? You cannot but ask this question. However, I must add, with this cosmopolitanism, there is a deep-seated history of occupation, ostracization, colonialism that cannot be, you cannot divide the two. What happens is, on one hand, we want to celebrate some of these things. On the other hand, we are extremely angsty about this. And both exist simultaneously. We are oddly very proud of our cosmopolitanism, we in the East, but we cannot bifurcate it from this deep sense of contestation that exists in our history. Because colonialism broke many things that was natural, including the point you made, Admiral, broke natural geographies into two. Geographies that have been naturally together for a long, long time. Let me come to the security aspect for a moment there. One of the questions I asked many of my friends within government and outside, and I'm yet to find an answer, is a question a Bangladeshi High Commissioner used to ask us about 10 years ago. The question is the following. As global warming impacts the Bay of Bengal and waters begin to rise as they are, displacement will happen in this region, in Bangladesh. When this displacement happens, anywhere between 2 to 10 million people, depending on who's making the assessment, will have to move. Where will these people move? By all assessments, many of these people will move towards the border of the boundaries of India into what is today West Bengal, in a region where we are now trying to finalize the border of the last 600 kilometers. Now, any population moving in large numbers towards India, India will have no choice but to embrace these climate refugees. Till date, I am yet to hear of a single person give me a coherent answer on what India's strategy for this future happenstance will be. Even though we're a country where so much conversation is happening about immigration, illegal immigration, all kinds of things, we do not have an answer. And this stares us on the face. We have to address this question. We have to have a plan B. I don't believe, maybe there is a plan, I don't know of it. And I first heard this more than 10 years ago. Subsequently, I've asked lots of people, but there is no answer. Number two, let me take off from what Mr. Akbar was saying. As always, I am a generation which saw many people in India speak very passionately against the fact that India would develop nuclear weapons. Now, of course, I believe, in my opinion, that that's one of the most important strategic things India did for its own security. Today, we are again hearing voice after voice in Delhi and otherwise saying that the Great Nicobar Project should not be built. I am not for a moment saying that environmental concerns should not be taken into account. However, I want to place this, and I've said this to Admiral Chauhan and others, I wish to place this before all of you. In my opinion, we are a country where the general public space, public conversation, has very little idea or concern for our own security and sovereignty. Indians believe that this map is eternal, our security and sovereignty. Why we believe that, God only knows, considering we have constant conflict, but many Indians believe this, and we speak as if we are in one of the safest places in the world. We have no contestation, we have no problems. We must understand one simple thing, and I'm sorry to sound passionate about this. Are we going to embrace that we need to secure our sovereignty and security at the cost? There's always going to be a cost. There is always a cost to secure the security of your country. Are we willing to pay some cost or not? If we are not willing to pay that cost, then history will define what happens to us. Are we willing to pay a cost to, as Mr. Akbar said, finally we have a forward strategy? Are we willing to defend our security and sovereignty? And what are we willing to pay the price to defend it? If these questions remain amorphous for us, remain romanticized for us, then there is a price to pay. We are still paying it. We will pay it in the future. I think for the first time, including in my home state of Bengal, these questions are being debated in coffee shops. These questions are being debated in universities. You go to Calcutta, you talk to people, people will tell you that they think about these questions. For the first time, all these years, nobody cared. I think we are at a turning point in history. These waters will be supremely important. I think lots of new things will happen there. These debates will happen. Of course, there will be debate. We're a raucous country. We're 1.5 billion people. Of course, there's going to be debates. But I think there are critical issues that we need to understand as Indians about our own security and sovereignty.
I really wanted to take off and bring to you, Hindol, is the fact that once again, we seem to have a requirement for internal and regional communication. This communication, this lack of adequate communication, the lack of information, which is credible information and isn't reduced only to sloganeering or developing acronyms of one or the other kind. It is necessary for us to be able to build a confidence level amongst our people that we are actually all moving together in some regional fashion, in addition to obviously having primacy in each country for its own economic well-being of its own people. So if you look at the Bay of Bengal's littoral, it's, as has already been mentioned, it is one of the most climate vulnerable regions on the earth. Sea level in the North Indian Ocean is rising at rates exceeding the global average. States like Odisha, West Bengal, international states like Bangladesh are all facing intensifying risk from extreme weather events, and the Sundarbans, which is the world's largest mangrove ecosystem shared by India and Bangladesh, is already under existential threat from precisely this kind of desire to build hard infrastructure rather than look at other nature-based or eco-based infrastructural approaches. So is there a civilizational dimension to all this crisis, and can shared ecological vulnerability become a foundation for a new and more urgent form of regional cooperation? Can we at least leverage the fact that misery loves company to make sure that the region actually sits together and talks about things that are commonly experienced by each of them? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll take off from what Gokul Asthanaji was saying. And you also mentioned, you agreed with him. Most Indians don't realize, as they look towards London and New York and California, that both for their tourism purposes, leisure, and for business, that do you know that Indonesia has a larger e-commerce market today than India? I see this because we almost at a level do not recognize the opportunities that are relatively lying close by from us in that part of the world. We are so consumed with always looking towards one direction that we don't realize. I said this recently to somebody from the world of business, that do you know, who was talking to me about e-commerce in India, that do you know Indonesia's market in e-commerce is larger than India? Most people who work in e-commerce in India do not know this. And that to me is a tragedy. Most people recognize that Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos were very wonderful, cheap but wonderful places to visit once Goa began to crumble. And yet, my point is, we don't have to see a point where we cannot go to Goa because it's too expensive or many of the things are going wrong there, to recognize that from Calcutta, it's probably easier, faster and quicker and indeed cheaper to go to some of these places than to go to Goa. So this lack of recognition of the ecosystem that lies in this part of the world for us is really vital, and it must be recognized. Many Indians do not recognize, again, that for all the talk about civilization, one of the great connections of that civilization are the great temples of Angkor Wat. And it never, in most itineraries of bucket lists of places to see before a person dies, you will not see Angkor Wat, even though it's one of the most fascinating things to see. You will not see that in most Indians' list. So we have, for some strange reason, we have cut ourselves away from what is really, in a sense, our neighborhood. I think today there is really a lot of importance must be given to reviving those things. You mentioned common problems of climate change. The cutting of Bangladesh and the cutting away of Bangladesh, we discussed earlier also, was a great tragedy in many ways. Do you know, in the Sundarbans, for all the talk about differences between religion, in the Sundarbans, I was recently there because I'm writing a book about worship of feminine divine. There is a goddess called Ma Monosha, which is shared on both sides, the Bangladesh side and the Indian side. Hindus and Muslims and anybody else who's there in that ecosystem, whether it's Ma Monosha or there is Bon Bibi, which is the goddess of the forests. And please note that one is Ma Monosha, giving it a Hindu sort of terminology. The other is Bon Bibi, giving it a sort of Muslim terminology. And yet these are all commonly accessed divinities of those mangroves. Another history that we rarely know. Yes, it is true that Amitabh Ghosh wrote a beautiful book about this called The Hungry Tide, but even today most people don't know this. So there are many of these things that are natural to the ecosystem, natural to the geography, natural to the local imagination. But somehow for the rest of us in India, we have very little understanding of this ecosystem. However, may I end with a positive note? I do believe it's beginning to happen. In the last 10 years, I've had more friends in Calcutta tell me that they're going for holidays in different parts of Southeast Asia than ever before. As you know, all Bengalis love to go to London if they can afford it in summer. But many of them are also now choosing to go to other parts, especially in Southeast Asia. And that, I think, on a funny but a happy note, that I think is a positive development.